That was Tanjil Rashid reporting. Chris, the policy wonks there are saying there's a 13% inner London swing to Labour. Were we to see that, that would be enough for Labour to take Westminster for the first time. How worried are you?
Well, I think we've all seen how accurate opinion polls are at the last election and at the referendum.
So you don't believe them?
And, well, look, I mean, let's wait until the election actually happens. But I think Westminster City Council have an incredibly strong story. They charge the lowest Band D council tax in the country. It's less than half their immediate neighbour, Labour-controlled Camden, and yet their services are excellent.
So why are Labour doing so well?
Well, we don't know they're doing so well. They collect the bins twice a week in Westminster. In Croydon, my borough, Labour-run, bin collections have been cut. They've got the highest social mobility in the country. Their children's services are rated outstanding by Ofsted, whereas in Croydon, the Labour-run borough I'm from, the children's services have been found to be dangerous.
Right, you're giving me a list of what you see as the achievements of the council, but we've just heard there, you may say that we can't believe the polls, but look what happened in the general election in terms of, well, Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party did much better than people thought. So I say to you again, the last time this was a marginal area, you have to go back to Shirley Porter and the Homes for Votes scandal. So what is happening?
Well, look, I mean, I think Andy Slaughter alluded to it. Clearly, in the general election and national election, there were significant challenges for the Conservatives, especially in inner London. But this is a local election. It's about local issues, and Westminster Council, in common with Wandsworth and other Conservative councils, do a fantastic job delivering excellent services for low tax, unlike Labour-run councils like Croydon, where I'm from, who do a terrible job in things like children's services and collecting rubbish, while charging exorbitantly high council tax.
Right, there would still have to be an enormous swing. I mean, it may be great publicity to say that Labour may take the scalp of a council that you have never held in recent time, but it is actually unrealistic.
Well, I note a note of desperation in Chris's voice, and the fact that Labour is trying to win Westminster very seriously, which it is, and it has great representation. It has a fantastic MP in Karen Buck. It has a great opposition there. But you're right, it is a very big ask, because you're asking them to go from having a quarter of the seats to winning. But there is a chance, but it will take a lot of work, and it will take a big turnout from voters, like the EU voters we heard from them, but also from people who, and I'm sorry, but Chris absolutely gets it wrong about Westminster. It is a terrible council. It has it has the 6th highest child poverty in the country. People think it's a wealthy area. It's not. And yet they've taken £10 million in the last 2 years.
But as you say, it's still unrealistic for Labour then to actually win it. I mean, could you sit here today and say, we're going to win that?
You're very stupid to predict the results of elections. People weren't predicting that Labour would take Hammersmith 3 years ago, and we did, and we are the only council since then to actually cut council tax during that time in London. So, and I hope that we will win again on our record. But the Tory record in Westminster is terrible, particularly on housing.
All right.
They're one of the worst achieving councils in terms of providing affordable housing in London.
How do you judge this policy from the leader of the council, who's asking the richest residents to pitch in with a voluntary tax? Do you support that?
Well, this is more desperate amateur stuff, isn't it? You cannot run government on the basis of charity. Look, the real crisis in local government is because every council has at least a third of its budget cut by the cuts in central government. During the austerity period, central government rather cowardly chose to cut local government rather than cutting some of its own services.
Is this just a gimmick? I mean, would you like your constituents, your richest constituents, to pay around £850 a year more, donate it to council coffers?
Well, I mean, look, I'm always in favour of trying new things. I think you've got to be, flexibly minded. And let's give it a try. Let's give it a try and see what happens. I'd be perfectly happy for Croydon Council to do that. In fact, the Conservatives on Croydon Council have proposed exactly this measure. But let's take Westminster as an example. They've got, on housing, which Andrew mentioned, we've got 415 homeless places, overnight shelter places in Westminster, the highest in the country. There are 7 teams of people going around every night in Westminster actively trying to help homeless people. So I think Westminster have a very proud record of delivering great services for low council tax, and that's why they deserve to get re-elected, because that's what these elections are about.
Why not just put up council tax? I mean, this system, which Andy Slaughter has said is a gimmick, really, it's a charity, rather than a charitable donation, rather than setting up a new system. Why not just put up the council tax? Why don't you advise Westminster to do that?
Well, it's up to Westminster to set their own level of council tax.
Would that be better?
But if they felt they absolutely needed to rely on that money to run their services, I'm sure they would put their council tax up. But this is a voluntary measure to provide additional services, and people can choose whether to pay it.
A good idea for the rich to pitch in.
Look, it's a joke. You cannot run government on the charity of individuals. Street homelessness has gone up 100% 140% since the Tories got back into government. There are 2,500 families in temporary accommodation in Westminster. It's a shambles, and this sort of gimmick isn't going to convince anybody.